Hello, folks, and thank you guys for checking out our annual meeting this year via PowerPoint. My name is Dana Boyle, and I'm president of the Northern Neck Vegetable Growers Association, and I welcome you. We would love to be able to be with you all this year in person to fellowship and have lunch together and all that fun stuff. But since that could not happen, I will instead take this time to thank our extension agents, Stephanie and Trent, for putting together this information pack program. For those of you joining us that are not members of the Northern Neck Vegetable Growers Association, please consider contacting me or one of our members or uh, one of our extension agents to find out more about our educational programs, our educational trips, our scholarship, and more. We'd love to share more information with you about our fun association.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here today and listening to my presentation. My name is Emmanuel Torres. I am an assistant professor and horticultural cropping system specialist at the Eastern Shore Agricultural Research and Extension Center at Painter. And today I'm going to talk about the horticultural science program that I'm building at the Eastern Shore AREC. And also, I'd like to talk about high tunnels for vegetable production in Virginia. I I first started as a professor early this year, and part of the effort that me and my team have been doing has been a focus on developing a production practice that are specific for the environment that we have here in Virginia. Uh, Hopefully at the end of the presentation, you guys are going to see some results that are going to be able to apply to your own farms. In this particular case, we're going to talk about tomatoes under high tunnels. But I'm also going to give you an overview of um, how we're trying to build the horticultural science program and some of the common attractions that we're going to have in the upcoming years. So first, a little bit about myself. I am originally from the Dominican Republic, where I did my bachelor's. And as you can see here, that was many years and hairstyles ago. After the working in the Dominican Republic in greenhouse production, specifically in tomatoes, I moved to Florida, where I did my master's degree and PhD. My master was focus on bell pepper production on the protective structures. And then for the PhD, I shift gears towards open field and strawberry production, where I did some cultural evaluations and water management and for establishment of the strawberries in combination with planting dates. I was also an associate professor for the cultural sciences at Zamorano University in Honduras, which is the biggest agricultural university in Latin America, where I was lucky enough to work with an amazing group of students that helped me create new technologies for tropical crops. So after that, I came to Virginia Tech, um, where I was presented with the challenge of building the horticultural science program. And this is what I came up with. Basically, the program will focus on three main areas. First, we're going to work with traditional crops, specifically tomatoes and potatoes, which are fairly big on the eastern shore, but also on the eastern part of the state. And then further down the road, we're gonna start working with also with sweet corn and snap beans, just to give a couple of examples of potential row crops that we're gonna work with. In addition to that, we're also gonna focus a lot on remote sensing, specifically water stress in vegetables and fruit. On the lower right corner, you can see a short video of a 3D diagram that we did for a potato field. Although it looks pretty nice, we can actually use the information for this from this animation to create indexes that can help us estimate water requirements for the crop and even potential yield for a particular season. And then last but not least, we also want to be working with alternative crops and production systems, which I think is one of the points that medium and small growers might be more interested in. There are definitely different options that we're going to be working with, edamame and green tea just being two of them. In particular, today I want to focus on the high tunnel production part. This 2021, we put a lot of effort in reestablishing the tunnels at the research station, and we run a couple trials that help us have some preliminary data that we later gonna use for, developing a bigger projects, production systems under high tunnels for vegetables for Virginia. So today you guys are gonna see more of a snapshot of the results that we have this past season. But I'm hoping that with time we're gonna be able to actually present you with a complete production system that you guys can implement in your own farms. So first, let's talk a little bit about the basics of high tunnel production. High tunnels are just a type of protector structure, although the majority of the people related to this believe that high tunnels are a great tool to protect the crop against cold weather. The reality is that in most cases, farmers will see more benefits for their crops by protecting the plants against rainfall. Because it's not that common for growers to extend their season, although it is possible. There are different challenges that go a little further than just having a high tunnel to protect your crop whenever we get into the months of December, January, November, February. This graph on the right side shows the changes that we have in average every month in the Eastern Shore in temperature, rainfall, and for the period. And the idea behind this is, as you can tell, here, for example, if you go from January to July, you can definitely see that the temperature is increasing as it is the photo period. And using the baseline of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the point where most vegetables are going to stop growing. They are not necessarily going to lose yield, but rather the plant is just going to stop because of the low temperature. And we can see that that cutoff is around November. And from here, we can imply that basically having a high tunnel after November and getting towards December might be an option for season extension, because the temperatures under the tunnel usually are going to be a little higher than the outside, especially if your tunnel is completely covered. The reason for that is because the air inside the tunnel is not actually moving and is still receiving all the radiation from the sun, and therefore it's just increasing in temperature. Now, this will change depending on the size of the tunnel, the design, the plastic, and the openings that you might have. But in general terms, a protector structure or a high tunnel will usually have a higher temperature inside than the temperature that you're going to feel on the open field. Now, as I was saying, when we start seeing the rainfall and the fact that we can have the changes that we have in the year, we can notice that we have in the Eastern Shore we got a little bit of upside on the rainfall in March, but then August and July, which is within the traditional season for tomatoes at least, is when we have the most rainfall in the shore. Meaning that if we were to grow tomatoes, in this case, because this is the example that I'm using for the rest of the data that I'm going to show, if we have a tunnel on top of our tomatoes, we might be able to protect them against rainfall, especially in the months of August and July. Now, with that in mind, that's exactly what we did. we basically wanted to see if having a roof on top of our tomatoes without changing the actual production system that we usually use on the open field will have any kind of effect on the final yield and quality that we have. So for that, we basically rebuilt the tunnels that we had at the research station, and we planted the tomatoes under that. Now, in order for us to actually start creating a production system, we also tried to implement different in-row distances and planting roads within the tunnel. Traditionally, in the open field, we got a single row that we use for tomatoes that is planted, and the tomatoes are planted usually at 2 feet apart. With the tunnel, we decide to go with plants a little closer. In the single row, we measure, we have a treatment with where the plants were 2 feet apart in a single row, which translates to a plant density of 4,356 plants per acre, which is the standard for the open field. And then we started to increase the density after that. We went a little closer, but still with a single row, which increased the number of plants to 5,808, basically almost 25% more plants. Then we took the same 2 feet of in-row distance, but instead of having a single row, we have a double row, which increased our uh, plant density to 8,700 plants per acre, basically 50% more than the traditional open field production system. And then we also have the 1.5 feet between plant, and we have that in double row, where we basically increased the population by 62% compared to the open field. And then we basically measure what, as you can see here in the pictures, we basically created uh, a system specifically designed to protect the tomato plants with the least resources possible. So in this case, we only have the roof on top, which is protecting the plants against rainfall. And then on the sides, we put some cover crops, in this case, sun hemp, which we knew we was going to grow higher than the base 4 feet that we have between the soil here, the ground here, and the roof. So, and this cover crop had a double objective. First was to protect the crop against high wind and debris that might come with the wind, and also to promote the the inclusion of pollinators within the structure. So these flowers, we were hoping that they attract pollinators into the tunnel. These pictures here are just so you guys can see the quality of the plants that we were getting. This is the double row right here, and this is the single row plants. We didn't have uh, uh, many issues with diseases or pests this season, so the data that we fairly good, I'll say. So for this particular trial, we had to measure things in two ways. First, we had to see the results that we were getting per plant, which is what you guys can see here, and then the results that we got per unit area, in this case per acre. So let's start with the results per plant. What we found was that for the number of fruits per plant, if we planted in a single row, we were basically getting 45% more fruits per plant than if we planted in a double row, which makes sense because in this case, having a double row will mean that plants will have to share the resources that are in the soil, meaning water and nutrients, in some cases sunlight, meaning there will be more competition. Therefore, if we have less plants, it might be the case that the response that we have per plant will be better compared to a higher density with more competition. Um, this is for the planting rows. In terms of the in-row spacing, we had something similar. Plants that were further apart, in this case 2 feet apart, produced 31% higher number of fruits per plant compared to plants that were a little bit closer. In this case, 1.5 feet between plants within the single row. there was no interaction between the number of planting rows and in-row spacing that we have. That's why we presented both separately. We did found something similar for the actual yield per plant, similar to the number of fruits that we got. Every time that we have one single row planted compared to double rows, we found 44% increment in the actual yield per plant that we had. And we can also see the same results for the in-row spacing between plants. Plants that are further apart, again, probably because they have less competition, they produce 34% higher yield per plant, in this case, pounds per plant. Now, like I mentioned, we first have to see the results per plant, and then because the density changes depending on the treatment, now we have to see the results per unit area. And once we do that, we notice that there's a shift in the results. For example, the number of fruits per acre, we actually found no difference among all the treatments. It, between in-row spacings of 1.5 and 2 feet and planting rows 1 or 2, there was no significant difference. And again, this is because although we were having a higher number of fruits per plant in the treatments that were further apart, such as the 2 feet and one single row, because there are more plants in this treatments of double row and this treatment of 1.5 feet between plants. Therefore, although per plant the results were lower, having more plants basically increase the actual number of fruits to a point where it actually competes to these two treatments. Again, for the total yield, also we found a similar trend. Again, although these plants here were further apart and they were producing higher yield per plant, given that we have more plants in these treatments per unit area and in this one too. In this one too, I'm sorry. There was no significant difference among all the treatments that we evaluated with an average yield of about 24 tons per acre. Now, what the first big result that we found here was that the traditional system that we use on the open field might work pretty well under high tunnel conditions, meaning that a grower can easily transition from the open field to the high tunnel without needing to shift or change too much his the production system that has been used he or she has been using for years on the open field, which simplifies the establishment of the high tunnel and and the production within that. Something that I like to mention is that we did not prune the plants in this treatment in this trial. We used the same wooden sticks to tie the plants and keep them upright, and we basically homologate all the practices that we have in the open field, and we just did it under the high tunnel. So that's pretty good, and that's is something that we should keep in mind for the next results that you guys are going to see when we start to compare high tunnels to the actual open field. So at this point, because we didn't find differences among treatments per unit area, we had to start trying to find out why we didn't find those differences. And the first thing that we did was within the actual experiment, we measure the plant height. And the reason for that is once plants start competing for light, and you guys probably have seen this before, if a plant is competing for light, it will usually try to overextend the stem of the upper part of the stem of the plant, meaning instead of growing to the size, the plant will start to elongate the top part, so it can compete with the weeds or other plants that are too close to it. And this is just a response to the lack of light. We call this response etiolation. And it's a pretty neat one because instead, if we want to see if there's competition for light, for radiation, we just have to measure how tall the plants are. All things being equal, if one treatment is struggling because of low radiation, those particular plants are going to be a little bit taller than the rest. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to produce more or less. It just means that the plant is using the sugars and nutrients to elongate the stem instead of, having uh, bigger leaves or producing more fruits. So to figure out if there was actual competition for radiation, we actually measured, like I said, the plant height. And what we found was that there was no difference at 4, 8, and 12 weeks in the height of plants planted either at 2 feet or 1.5 feet apart. So we found also something similar for the number of rows. There was no difference in the plant height at 8 weeks and 12 weeks, although we found a very small difference really early in the season. But overall, what this means is that if all the plants had the same height, there was no actual competition for radiation. So whatever response we are seeing in the results that I just showed you are probably more related to other factors. So light is not one of them at this point because of the data that we just saw. So our goal for the upcoming seasons, once we repeat this, is figure out, well, if we are having less yield per plant in the treatments where the plants are closer together, therefore they have to be competing for something. Now we know that it's not light, it's probably therefore water or nutrients. And what I want to get, I mean, through this logic, what I want to get is if I can get to a point where I can increase the density within the tunnel and just shift a little bit the amount of water or nutrients or fertilization that we are applying within the tunnel, we might be able to increase the yield based on a higher plant density. Uh, because now we know the light is not the issue, and we cannot really, if light was an issue, we cannot really increase the radiation that we already have. But we can definitely increase the nutrients and the water that we have available for the plant. So that's good news for the future because we would like to keep researching this and see if we can, how far we will have to increase the fertilization to actually have an increment in the yield with a higher plant density, or how much more water we will have to apply if water was the case for that. So in the upcoming years, I would like to have an answer for this. The about this particular trial and where at least most people get excited about is, well, what about if we do the same thing that you were doing in the open field at the same time? Like, is the fact that you're putting a roof on top of these plants actually, doing anything to increase the yield compared to the open field? And to figure that out, we actually have the same variety that we had on the inside the tunnels planted in the open field just by the tunnels. They had to be probably 15 feet apart, something like that. And we planted the 4 replications of the same variety, and we managed the plants the same way, same fertilization, same water, just so we can compare what was happening on that season in the open field and with the same plants under a high tunnel. What we found? We just by having the roof on top of the plants, we were able to increase the actual yield that we were having by 35%, from 16 tons to almost 25 tons on average on the high tunnel. Now, I don't have the numbers of how much would it cost to establish these tunnels yet, but it's definitely a good news that we're having a better result within the structure that what we're having on the open field. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the reason for this is not the change in temperature. We were planting this still within the same season that we were have on the open field, meaning that the temperature outside was still fairly adequate for this plant. The real change came when we start protecting these plants against the rainfall just because of having the high tunnel on top. Uh, just so you have a reference, on the open field within the season, we receive about 16 inches of water. Well, of course, there was nothing within the high tunnel. So that definitely helped increase the quality because we were reducing the number of damaged fruits due to rainfall, and therefore we have, as a result, a higher yield under the tunnel compared to the open field. Uh, so near the end of my presentation, some common attractions. We're gonna keep working on having more specifics, recommendations for vegetables under high tunnels for Virginia. I'm hopeful that by the end of next year, I'm gonna be able to have to present results on plant density and in some cases pruning practices and fertilization practices under high tunnel for at least tomatoes and probably bell peppers. We're also going to be trying to identify crop coefficients for potatoes and tomatoes. This is going to be more focused on open field. The idea is that instead of the grower using either his experience or her experience for irrigation of the vegetables or maybe historic data, we are going to be able to actually provide crop coefficients that they are specific for the Eastern Virginia, and the growers can use this to be more efficient on their water use and therefore either reduce their costs of the production or increase their yield. We have been also working with color mulches, trying to reduce the detrimental effects that high temperature have on vegetables. We we have been testing the traditional black mulch on the summer dates compared to white mulch and metallic mulch, which I understand are more difficult to sometimes purchase. And I also know that they're fairly higher in price compared to the black mulch. And to try to find an alternative to this, we are testing the combination of black mulch with a product called kaolin clay. It's a commercial product, certified organic, and the idea here is just to create a physical barrier, in this case that is white, that help reduce the temperature of the surface of the plastic. So we tested this 2020, and we're gonna do it again on 2022. And so far the results are promising. I'm hopeful that I'm gonna be able to show you some results maybe in the next meeting. Also, some common attractions on the alternative crops part. We have been working with melons on their high tunnels and different ways to produce them, either with different pruning techniques and different varieties and soils media, which hopefully we're going to have something to show also next year. And something that we are really excited about is the introduction of green tea as a potential crop for Virginia. We understand that the environment in the state is, at least near the coast, is fairly adequate for this plant, and there's a huge market there. It's just it hasn't been tapped yet, and we think that with research and effort, we can show ways to take advantage of this crop in Virginia. We think we hope we have good results to show about this. And we want to thank you again for um, spending this half hour with me. Again, my name is Emmanuel Torres. Here's my contact information. I hope that the information that I just show you is helpful, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions. I think through email might be the option for that. But if not, um, I hope I see you in one of my trips to the Northern Neck next year. Thank you very much.
Please take a moment to complete the brief survey linked below. Your responses will give us a better understanding of how we are doing and how we may better serve your needs in the future. To access the survey, you may scan the QR code on the left using your smartphone's camera or QR code scanning app, or enter the link on the right into your internet browser. Thank you.